7, so we might make a start. Welcome to those of you who's joined us, and I expect we'll probably get a few more people hopping on as we go. My name's John Schäuble. I'm a CFA facilitator, and this is our new program called Fire Safety Essentials. So this replaced some of the Fire Ready Victoria programs we used to do, and tonight we're doing this as a webinar, so we're doing it online. So that's a bit scary for some of us people who are not used to this new technology. But in the context of COVID, and we've obviously just experienced another outbreak in Melbourne, it was thought wise to run some meetings along these lines. So I'll just start by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people, who are the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and the Aboriginal elders of other communities who may be with us tonight. As I said, this is a session being run on behalf of the Sassafras and Ferny Creek Fire Brigade, and coincidentally, I'm a member of that brigade, so that's good. I'm a former captain of the brigade, so we've been discussing and talking about community safety in our communities of Sassafras and Ferny Creek for some years. And so I'm happy to answer any questions. Or Callum, my partner in crime tonight is Callum McLean, who's another trained CFA presenter, and he's going to helpfully steer us through the more technical parts of the presentation, because it's a bit overwhelming to try and do it by yourself. So let's get going. And there's a couple of things here. I think for the purposes of tonight, rather than use the raising hand function, we'll use the chat function. So if you've got questions and you want to ask them, just put them in the chat, and Callum will be able to address them. If he can't, I'll help him out later. So this is a webinar, so it means that basically you can't turn your video or your audio on. You'll be able to interact by answering some polls. So we're going to do a bit of polling as a different way of communicating. The session's being recorded. The bit that's recorded is me speaking and the slide pack. So, we don't record any of your, I can't see you, so we're certainly not recording you. All we can see from you is the chat, and I don't think the chat even gets recorded, so that's okay. I'll be showing you some animations, or actually technically Callum will be showing you some animations. And some of those are a little bit confronting, so just be aware of that. And if you want to sort of turn them off, that's fine. But basically, what I'm trying to say is don't worry too much that this is going to be a death by PowerPoint presentation. So it will be a little bit. There's a little bit of PowerPoint to go through, but we'll try and zhuzh it up a bit by having some polling and some chat and some questioning. So can I just get people in the chat to use the chat? You hover your mouse over the chat thing. And can I just get people to tell us where you're joining us from? So are you coming from Ferny Creek, from Sassafras, from Melinda, from somewhere else around the hills? And we'll see what happens there. Okay, so we've got Sassafras, Ferny Creek, Sherbrooke, Ferny Creek. Someone's coming from Doreen on the other side of town. Welcome from Doreen. And Ferny Creek. So we've got a few people local and one person from out of town. So that's okay. And so that bit's working. So the chat's working. So if you've got questions that you want to put to Callum or I, then use the chat. So can we ask? We might just try and have a bit of a poll now, Callum. So you want to launch the poll, the first poll there, and we'll see how that works. Okay, so some questions here for you, and this is just to give you an idea. So all you need to do is click on these. So how long have you lived here? How would you rate your knowledge around fire? Have you been to a CFA meeting before? Okay, so there's some responses coming there, which is great. So we've got people who've been here for less than a year, 1 to 5 years. A couple of people have been here for more than 10. Okay, so that's good. That's a sort of interesting mix of people. So I guess for people who've been here for less than 5 years, this is pretty significant. We'll talk about some things that happened in the distant past, and that'll give you some sense about what the risk is locally, so that's good. And we've got some sort of long-termers at the top there. How would you rate your knowledge around fire? Low, very low. A lot of you around medium, so that's interesting. And it's good that you have that sort of sense, and a couple on the high and very high, who I suspect are probably fire brigade members, so that's okay. And how long have you been a CFA member? Have you been to a CFA meeting before? And so 7 of the 10 people who responded have said yes, so that's great. So this is a slightly different version of how we do this, but that's okay. So let's get rid of that one. So that's the interactive bit. So how to interact. So using polling and chat. Okay. Okay, so we've been through that. What are you going to learn? So as we said, the engaging the polls is anonymous. You scroll through to see the responses. That's fine. Chat function, as discussed. So I think that's all pretty self-explanatory. The what will you learn? So what are we trying to achieve with tonight's session? So one of the things is understanding the local fire risks up here in the Dandenongs, on the ridge area of the Dandenongs. So that's we have some really specific risks up here we need to have a bit of a think about, and some factors that make this a bit different, a bit more interesting than other parts of the world. What to expect from a fire? So what will you see happening, and what can you expect will happen? How do you know if there is a fire? And that's important because sometimes it's a bit hard to find out what's going on. So we'll talk about some of the ways you gather information before and during an event. A little bit on planning and decision making, and a little bit about surviving if it all goes pear-shaped. So, even with the best plans and intentions, sometimes you get caught. And so we'll have a quick discussion about what to do if that happens. Okay, so let's have a bit of a discussion now about understanding the local risks. First up, we'll talk about our state. And so Victoria, as we know, is one of the most fire-prone parts of the world. And we can see from that slide there's a range of landscapes. And so to the left-hand side of the screen there, you'll see landscape that looks a bit like what the landscapes around here: dense bush, sort of semi-rainforesty. And as we go around in a sort of clockwise direction from the top, you see a bit of coastal landscape. You see some agricultural grazing land. We've got some sort of high country landscape there. So, Gippsland high country. And so there's some different sorts of landscape. And I guess the important thing to remember is that fire can occur in all of those landscapes, and it will occur differently. So it will behave differently. Obviously in forest it moves more slowly but with great intensity. In the grasslands it moves quickly, but with less intensity. So just have a think about that. I mean, I guess one of the important things at the moment is that we're all spending a lot more time in Victoria probably. So our options to go and have holidays in other parts of the country, let alone overseas, are quite limited. So there's a lot of people moving around in the Victorian landscape, and it's important, if that's your holiday option, it doesn't matter if you're going down the coast or if you're going out into Gippsland or up into the high country, that you understand the potential and the sorts of landscape you're moving into with fire in the back of your mind. Okay, so how do you get in and out? How will fire behave? Is it a high fire danger risk area? And we'll talk about some of that in a tick. So it's just important, probably more important than it's been in previous years, because we're basically a bit stuck here, which is good. Victoria's a nice place. We're going to have a little quick discussion about the different weather areas, or the fire risk areas, or the fire danger areas. So this map here is the 9 fire weather districts. They're actually the 9 weather districts. So if you go onto the Bureau of Meteorology site, they divide up the state into these 9 areas. And so you can see they're pretty self-explanatory. And the fire ban districts align with these. So when there's a total fire ban, you'll see that there's restrictions in so some areas, the Mallee and the Wimmera Northern Country, they've had a number of fire bans this year because it's dry and ready to go up there and will burn quite readily. We're obviously in the central area, so for our purposes, if you're hanging around home, we're in the central district. But look at the central district. It runs from Ballarat all the way across to Pakenham and sort of up to Reefton and down to Lorne. So it's a big area, and so sometimes people say, how come it's a fire ban today, or why is the fire weather pitched as being, you know, severe or extreme, when really up here in the hills it's pretty okay? That's because we're also looking at Ballarat, Lorne, you know, out the back of Tullamarine. So those sorts of areas will push the fire danger rating up, and we'll talk a little about fire danger ratings later. So that's your explanation of why. So the Central District, as I say, is quite a large area. It's all of metropolitan Melbourne. There's some grassland country. There's some hard, dry, scrubby country sort of north to the north, and then there's sort of wet forests stretching out into Gippsland. Right. So let's talk about seasonal outlook. Okay, so this season is interesting from a fire point of view. So there's a couple of maps, one showing on the left-hand side showing the chance of the temperature being higher than normal, and on the right-hand side there's a rainfall. So this is the map. This is the predictions from December to February, and I left them without updating them because we're not quite finished. We're obviously not finished February yet, but it's pretty much panned out this way. If anything, it's been slightly cooler than they were predicting, but certainly the rainfall has panned out. So you know, the chances of exceeding the median rainfall, so the average rainfall, we've certainly met those. Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit that more. So this year was predicted as being a La Nina year, and of course that means, and traditionally that means wetter, more humid, not as much, and in a fire weather sense, La Ninas are great because they're basically, it reduces the fire risk that we're likely to have over the summer months. And if we think about that, so it's certainly panned out in that way. So we've had a lot of rainfall in areas such as Melbourne and the Dandenongs, and we'll talk about rainfall in detail. But so we're well over our rainfall, but things like the soil moisture in the upper Yarra area was hitting 100% before Christmas, and that's fantastic because it means that, you know, for the fuels to dry out in order to burn, it's going to take longer, and so that's a good thing. So lots of moisture in the soil, first time for a number of years, I have to say, because we've been in rainfall deficit around this part of the world for probably the last decade. So what we've had is more rain, less extreme conditions, more humidity. Not as many thunderstorms as we might have had, but they may still be coming, but certainly fewer extreme fire danger days. So that's the good news. And so what that means is it's going to be a shorter fire season than we've had previously. And if you think one of the indications of that is when do they bring the fire restrictions in? Well, the fire restrictions come in on Monday. That's pretty late. So for fire restrictions to coming in February, it's late. And I would imagine it'll be a short, sharp fire season. And so that's terrific because it means the risk is not there. And so, you know, we can all get on with autumn, which is my favorite time of year. So that's the good news. There are still some parts of the state where there's some risk. So up in the Northern Country, they've had some fires, and certainly once you're over the divide, it's dry. Gippsland is still quite dry. I haven't been there for a month or so, but last time I was out there, the forest was dry. The valleys were nice and green, but the forest was dry and would burn readily. So it's not as if we're completely out of the woods. So, and I guess the other thing to remember is that it really only takes a few days to flip things quickly. So 3 or 4 hot windy days without rain and without much humidity, and there's potential for fire to run across the top of the landscape or to run across the top of the fuel, and so just be wary of that. So sometimes you see those spooky grassland drying maps that are put around that show big bits of red and big bits of orange and stuff. Well, that's okay, but that's just another indicator. But really, the important indicator for up here is rainfall. So let's look a little more at rainfall. I can get my most excellent computer to work here. There's a map of the rainfall last year, and so you can see that the blue blob just to the east of Port Phillip Bay is pretty much where we are, and so it's very much above average. So we had much above average rainfall. So last year our rainfall up here was 1,688 millimeters. So, you know, in an average year we'll have 1,200. So it's about a third, again, more than we would normally get. We had some really wet months last year. April, you know, 272 mils. That's a lot of rain. We get about twice as much rain as they do in the suburbs of Melbourne. So Melbourne's around the 600 to 700 mils. We're pretty much twice as much. The only month last year where we didn't get much rain was September, and that was great because that was like spring and all the flowers came out and it all looked fantastic. So you know, because I'm a bit of a weather nerd, we'll even go a bit further and look at the actual details. So you can see we had really wet January, February, even March was wet. So those first 4 months, and that sort of set us up for the rest of the year. And then you can see the only month that was low was September, and every other month we were well above, you know, above or well above average, which is kind of interesting. And so and on the right hand side there, you'll see that in this January we've had 197 mils, so nearly cracked the 200. So it just kept raining, and that's terrific. And if you know, if you want to think about it a bit more, if you look at those records, the really wet years we used to get were in the 50s and 60s. So think about that. You can draw your own conclusions about what you think that means. But we certainly don't get that sort of level of rainfall much anymore. But this year's been an exception. Having said all that, the last really wet year was 1996. So we had about 1,400 mils. And of course, in 1997, we had the worst bushfire event in Ferny Creek that we'd ever had. So rainfall doesn't necessarily cancel out the risk of fire, but it's an important and very helpful indicator. Okay, let's talk now a little bit about local vegetation. And if I can get you just to drop into the chat now and say, what sort of landscape do you reckon we have up here? Okay, so what are the sort of things in the landscape that we have here, and what are some of the characteristics of the landscape? Anybody? Nobody in the chat. Here we go. This is better. Okay, so a lot of ground cover. Barb's gone with a mixed sclerophyll. We'll talk about that. Lots of trees. Yep. So what is it? Bushland? Yeah, lots of shrubs and trees. Okay, so we've got vegetation. What are some of the other landscape characteristics? So if we think about, we've got mountain ash. Yeah, so we'll talk about the differences in the vegetation that's here. It's nully hilly, says Barb. So it's steep topography. Okay, that's the other thing I was really looking for. So we've got a lot of bush, not much open space. We live on top of a mountain in the middle of a forest. You know, in bushfire terms, that's not a great place because you know, fire travels uphill, so it's faster. So you know, we've got some of those conditions here that make this a particularly not dangerous but tricky place in terms of fire management. So we live in the middle of quite dense bush, not hundreds of thousands of hectares of it stretching for miles, but we do live in the middle of a forest, and so that presents essentially some problems. There are essentially two sorts of bush up here, and I'll just talk quickly about the difference of bush. So if we think about the ridgetop part of the Dandenongs, which is where most of us are coming from, and you think about the tourist road, which runs from north to south, or from south to north, we're at the southern end of the ridge, and you know, Kalorama, Mount Dandenong up there is the northern end. So that road actually divides the two types of vegetation. There's two quite different types of vegetations in to different types of vegetation in the Dandenongs. So on that side of the hill that faces the northwest, or faces what you look at as you drive out from Melbourne, that's quite a dry forest. So it's a mixed species forest of, I don't know, stringy bark. There's a couple of sorts of stringy bark. There's some peppermint in there. There's some mountain grey gum. So it's a mixture of forest. And that picture on the left-hand side of your screen there is pretty much what it looks like. So it's that dry sort of and quite sparse underneath vegetation. So it's a bit of wattle and stuff like that. So that's one sort. That's one sort. That's a sort of what the technique we call a dry sclerophyll. On the other side of the tourist road, essentially, you go into mountain ash, and once you hit the ridge and go into the other side of the tourist road, you're into this sort of mountain ash forest. So someone's nominated mountain ash, and mountain ash is a different kind of forest altogether. It's a single species. Its understory might contain a few blackwoods, but it's basically an understory of quite lush things like ferns and sassafras and, you know, swordgrass and things like that. So it's a different sort of forest altogether. It still burns, but it takes longer to dry out. So the southern side, the wetter side of the hills, burns less frequently. It's whereas the northern side, because it spends all summer having the hot northerly winds beating down on the sunshine is shining on top of it, so it tends to dry out more quickly. And historically, that's where a lot of our problems have come from the sort of the basin side of the hills, if you like. So that's where a lot of our problems. Doesn't mean that you don't get them on the other side, but that's historically where a lot of our difficulties have occurred. Okay, so the Australian bush is designed to burn. So and some forests, in particular things like mountain ash, actually require fire to regenerate. So don't always think about bushfire being a bad thing. It's a bad thing if it's going to burn your house down, but it's part of the natural environment. We need to learn to adapt to it and to cope with it and to use it as a tool. Right. So, some of the characteristics of what's a bad fire day up here will be things like, strong northerly winds, and that's dangerous here because it pushes the fires from the bottom of the hill to the top of the hill quite quickly. So let's have a look at some of the local risks. So when I talked before about us living in the middle of a forest, you can sort of see that on that picture up there with the sky high marked. And so, from the distance from the bottom of the hill to the top of the hill is quite short. So in a linear sense, it's often 700-800 meters, maybe a kilometer. So it's not like Marysville here. We're not surrounded by millions of hectares of forest. But that doesn't necessarily matter. If it catches fire, it will do us a lot of damage. So on the top right-hand side there, you can see that's the fires from 1997. So that's the sort of situation we get into. Again, not a long way from the bottom to the top, but quite damaging. And those fires did a lot of damage, and people were killed, and and a number of houses were lost. So some of the things some of the risks we have are around access. So you can see there's a picture there of a house sort of out in the middle of the forest. So sometimes people live quite remotely in the middle of bush, and so that presents all sorts of problems for those people. Narrow tracks like on the left-hand side there, and the other issue we have some issues with. We have historically had some issues with arson. So I have to say, not for a number of years now. So there's been a pretty active policing program. So that's actually helped to reduce the incident and the major fires in the last few years. So around the Black Saturday time have not been started by arson, they've been started by accident. So even if you eliminate that, doesn't eliminate the risk of fire altogether. Okay. So what we know from a long history of bushfire in this part of the world is a fire that starts in somewhere like the basin or in Upper Ferntree Gully, it'll go from the bottom of the hill to the top of the hill really quickly. So it takes 10-15 minutes before it starts impacting on private properties. And if you look at that picture to the left-hand side there, you can see, you get a fire in the bottom of the bush down there around Doongala. It'll start chucking stuff up to the housing areas at the top of the hill quite quickly. So you instantly come under sort of ember attack pretty quickly. and eventually it'll burn right to the edge of those settlements. And there's some houses sort of on, out on those narrow little roads out in the bush. So the critical thing to remember here is that once we get a fire that starts here, there's not a lot of time, right? So you don't have much time to respond. So it's important that you're prepared for that eventuality in whatever manner you choose to. So, we'll talk about, should you stay with your house or should you leave? Well, for the only absolute guarantee I can give you in relation to bushfires, if you're not here when one comes, you won't get killed by it. So there's a heavy emphasis these days on leaving early, and that's of course the safest thing you can do. And for us here, it's a relatively simple thing to do. If you think about it, lots of us leave early every day to go to work. So you're really just doing what you would normally do. And absolute safety is not that far away. So, you move from the top of the hill down to those suburban areas down in Ferntree Gully and Boronia and places like that, and you're completely out of danger. So, leaving early is not the big deal for us that it is for more remote places. So think about some of the factors that add to our local risks. So, slope we talked about, fuel, limited access. So there's lots of fuel often, but there are programs to manage that, but we have limited access. We've got winding roads, we've got, vegetation right up to the road edge. We've got, extreme winds, and so there's extreme winds likely to come tomorrow, which leads to falling trees. So some of that limited access can actually be cut off quite simply, and we've had that occur on high fire danger days in the past, where, a mountain ash tree comes down across Sherbrooke Road. That's it for that road for 10 hours, basically, because that's how long it takes to clear a tree. So, you need to think about that and how you're getting in, how you're moving around, how you can get in and out and move around. Poor mobile phone reception is a real issue. It's a real issue you need to factor into your thinking. So, what's the phone service like at your house? We've got electricity infrastructure that's pretty vulnerable. So high winds, bushfires, the whole power system will come undone pretty quickly. So think about that, because that has ramifications for how you gather information in particular. And these days it has ramifications for even things like using your phone, because NBN doesn't have a power backup. And so therefore those of us who have retained a landline on the NBN, it means that won't work, right? So comms problems, power problems, access problems, and then you chuck into that mix tourists, cyclists, day trippers, school buses, schools, limited public transport to get in and out. So there's a whole lot of things you need to consider. It'll lead to traffic congestion, probable loss of road access. You can always guarantee the power's going to go. If there's a fire event up here, it pretty much happens automatically. They don't necessarily turn it off, but it'll go off because the infrastructure itself will be affected. Water. So most of us are on main supply water these days. That will come under stress. So for the purposes of firefighting, there'll be a whole lot of trucks and stuff sucking or hooking into the water mains, and so that will mean the pressure will drop. So you mightn't lose your water supply, but there won't be as much pressure as you normally would have. So you need to be not necessarily relying on having good water pressure. And the other thing is that people panic, because a lot of people, there's a small number of people here tonight, but lots of people don't even contemplate this stuff. So when it all goes pear-shaped, they're out running around going, what do I do now? And we've seen that a couple of times in recent years. Okay. I want you just to have a think about, if there was a fire, whether you think it would be realistic to expect a fire truck to come and defend your property. Okay, so bushfire breaks out, you're at home, is a fire truck going to come? And you don't need necessarily add anything to the chat, but this is the stats, okay? So Sassafras, Ferny Creek and Tremont and a little bit of Sherbrooke essentially has 921 properties and dwellings and a population of just under around 1,300 people. Now, to service that at a local area, our brigade has 3 trucks. Great if your house catches fire randomly, but during a bushfire, you can see the figures there. There's basically 1 truck for every 300 properties. Now, obviously, there are going to be more trucks, but we're not thinking in terms of coming to your house to look after you necessarily. What we're thinking about are the strategic objects or objectives of trying to pull up the fire somewhere. And so so the resources that are available to go down individual streets are quite limited, even when we bring in additional trucks. And there are a lot of fire brigades around here. So one of the things we do have as a bit of an advantage is we can, if a small fire starts, our whole objective is to stop it from getting to being a big fire. And so that's why there are really, we only have 3 trucks in our station. There's another 3 in Olinda, and there's another 3 down in 3 or 4 down in Upwey, and there's 3 over at Callista. So we can throw a lot of resources at these small fires quickly, but once it's up and running, that becomes a bit more of a problem. So, so we've talked a little bit about the risk. We've talked a little bit about your need to be thinking about this stuff in terms of developing your own plan or your own strategy for what am I going to do during before the fire season. What's my plan going to be on days of high risk? So the days of high risk are those days where it's high temperature, low humidity, strong northerly wind, and sort of unstable atmosphere. So they're the days, and you sort of get to know that over the years from experience. So, and there might up here be only 4 or 5 of those days every summer. This year I reckon we'll be lucky to get 80 because it's basically, Callum and I were joking this morning that summer was last Monday. That might have been it. But basically, it's those are the days. Hot winds, hot temperature. When you walk out the door in the morning at 8 o'clock and it's a bit crackly and the grass and the stuff is dry, and you've got really hot sun beating down, not much humidity in the air. So not like today. So today was quite hot, but it was also very humid. I mean, the humidity is up around 50% during the middle of the day, so not really a fire danger day, and no wind. So we only had one of the things, if you like. But if you've got the whole hamburger with a lot, then that's a bit more problematic. Okay. So what do you think was going to happen if we have a fire? Here we go. What to expect from a fire in our area? So we know that in Victoria we have lots of fires basically, and last summer we saw lots of fire in Victoria all over the place, and in other parts of the world. And we're seeing, this summer we've seen some fire in South Australia, and currently around Perth there's some pretty severe fires. So we know we have lots of fires, and in particular Victoria more so than other states. And we know about this because we see it on the TV, we see it on the telly, we see it on social media. And that's pretty much how most people experience bushfire in Australia. The likelihood that you'll actually see a fire in your lifetime is, or that most Australians will see a lifetime or see a fire in their lifetime is quite low. It's increased if you live somewhere like this because we have a sort of slightly higher risk than other places. But so we're trying to ask you, what we're asking you is to imagine what it would be like during a fire. And so to help you with that, I'm going to ask Callum now to play first of a couple of, or the first of a couple of animations. We'll start with one on ember attack. So ember attack is when it is the biggest cause of property loss in the Dandenongs, and essentially every house in this location is at risk from ember attack. And the animation is quite good at explaining how that happens. So it's really relevant to living in this area. And so pretty much any property in Australia that's within 700 metres of substantial chunk of bush is at risk of ember attack. And the closer you are, the more intense the experience is. But anyway, so Callum, off you go.
During a bushfire, embers will reach your home long before the flames do. Ember attacks are the most common way that houses catch fire. Embers are burning leaves, twigs, and pieces of bark. They help the bushfire spread by starting spot fires ahead of the main fire front. Short-distance ember attacks happen when leaves and small pieces of bark are blown from burning trees. The intense shower of sparks that forms fills the air with hot, burning embers, which will land on nearby vegetation and properties. The hot embers can easily land and get into your clothes and burn your skin, eyes, and airways. Small fires will start all around you and quickly become uncontrollable. The resulting chaos creates confusion as the fire seems to come from many directions, meaning it will be difficult to make good decisions about your safety. The experience will be physically exhausting and emotionally traumatic. Long-distance ember attack is caused by large bushfires that generate intense heat. As the hot air rises, it forms a column of smoke that sucks in air like a vacuum, increasing the intensity of the fire. The updraft in the column lifts embers, like large pieces of burning ribbon bark, hundreds of metres into the air, where strong winds can carry them many kilometres beyond the fire front. On Black Saturday, embers travelled more than 30 kilometres ahead of the main fire. When these embers land, they often start fires where leaves naturally accumulate, like in gutters, doorways and garden beds. So while you might think you're safe when a bushfire is far away, embers can fall from the sky and land around your home long before you even know there's a fire. But remember, your home isn't the only thing under threat during an ember attack. By the time you realise the danger, it might be too late as escape routes become jammed. Embers can also start fires on roads and block them completely, making late evacuation dangerous or impossible. That's why leaving early, before a fire starts, is always your safest option.
Back to you, John.
Thanks, Callum. So you can see what we're talking about there, and we talked earlier about the different types of vegetation. So the different sorts of vegetation throw up different sorts of embers. The stringy barks and stuff throw up these sort of fibrous, smaller things that will carry for a few hundred metres. One of the big dangers around here is once fire gets into Mountain Ash Forest, you think about Mountain Ash, got those long stringy strips of bark. Well, they can just be picked up in that convection column, and there was quite a good illustration of that, and carried for a long time, or a long way. So Black Saturday, I think we weren't getting burning embers, but we were certainly getting ash drop from up around Murrindindi. So it goes for a long, long way. And again, I remember in 97, and you get that sort of intense activity when it's going, and then people think, phew, that's good, it's all over. These things will lodge in gutters and down little eave points, and on collect basically anywhere around your house where leaves collect during winter or during spring when it's windy. They're the sorts of places the embers will go as well. So that's important to remember. And I remember in 1997, a friend of mine, someone knocked on his door in the middle of the night and said, "Excuse me, mate, but your house is on fire." And it was from embers that had dropped from up on One Tree Hill, and his house was down on the main road near where the old general store was. So hours afterwards, this in fact continues. So, and as you can see from that animation, leaving early is you could see some of that scenarios as it build out, why we talk about leaving early as being the safest option. Okay, so the next animation we'll show you, and again, this is a little bit confronting, but that's okay, is around, radiant heat. So people talk about being caught in bushfires and, running out of oxygen. Well, that's not going to happen. Being burnt to death by the flames, pretty unusual. What kills you during bushfires is radiant heat. And so we'll just, I'll let the animation do the talking. So Callum, off we go again. Thank you.
Victoria is one of the most bushfire-prone parts of the world. Every summer, bushfires threaten properties and lives. But did you know it's not the flames that kill most bushfire victims? No, it's the radiant heat. Most victims die from the effects of radiant heat long before they're reached by the flames. Radiant heat is what you feel when you sit next to a campfire. If a campfire heats up to 2 kilowatts per square metre, you'll feel that it's too hot and will want to move back from the fire. If you don't, this amount of radiant heat is enough to cause burns and blisters in as little as 40 seconds. At 12 kilowatts, it can cause some materials like dry timber to ignite. A bushfire can reach 100 kilowatts, and the effects can be truly catastrophic. For humans, radiant heat can cause burns from 100 meters away and cause a dangerous increase in body temperature. Radiant heat can cause the rapid onset of heat stroke. Heat stroke damages your brain, meaning you won't be able to concentrate to make good decisions as the fire arrives. Other impacts include severe damage of internal organs and death. There are some things you can do if you're caught in a fire. Cover your skin with long-sleeved natural fibre clothing, like wool. It's also useful to know that radiant heat only travels in straight lines and can't bend around corners. So, sheltering behind or inside solid structures may help protect you. But be aware, radiant heat will travel straight through glass. The best defense against radiant heat is a simple one. If you're not anywhere near a bushfire, its radiant heat can't hurt you. Leaving early is always your safest option.
Okay, so, sorry, I forgot to advance to this slide. Here's a little bit more about ember attack and the sorts of damage that it will cause in homes. So just a few little photos there to think about. So they're the sorts of places that embers will land. But let's talk about the radiant heat animation we've just seen. And radiant heat, we know, is the thing that kills people during fires. And so there are a couple of takeaway points out of that. One is you need to be wearing the right clothes. That's why firefighters wear sort of full protective overalls, gloves, helmets, masks, goggles, the whole shooting match. And so you can replicate that simply by wearing, if you're going to be in a bushfire area or an area where bushfire is impacting, you need to be dressed for the occasion. So, we've all seen those pictures of men, usually men, standing on top of the roof in their thongs, shorts and t-shirts. Not great for bushfires because you've got exposed skin, and as that animation showed, you're subject to blistering and burns from quite low levels of radiant heat, and bushfires generate huge amounts of radiant heat. So, and it has all of those medical consequences that we saw there. So, your ability to think clearly starts to diminish, and eventually your organs start to shut down. So, important thing about that. So, not just wearing the right clothes, but where are you? And so, if you are stuck in that situation, you need to be putting a solid barrier between yourself and the advancing fire. And so, often that's a structure, might be a house. So the worst place you can be in those circumstances out in the open. You need to have something solid between you and the flames. And so you can see from that those two photos there, the sort of impact that radiant heat, these things haven't caught fire. This is just the impact of radiant heat. So on the left-hand side, it's pretty much melted and scorched the building. On the right-hand side, it's certainly melted the signage. So this is, again, why we say not being here when a bushfire comes is the safest option. Okay. So here's just a selection of quotes from people who have been through fires, and most of those are around the Black Saturday event, but there's another one from Cobden around a fire up in Cobden, which was sort of 2018. So, you know, I couldn't stand in front of the heat for more than 2 seconds. And think about it. I mean, think about what it's like when you stand around a campfire or in front of a fireplace. It gets hot and you have to step away. So magnify that in terms of a bushfire, and it's like, you know, you cannot be in that sort of environment for very long without being injured or overcome. And the two quotes down the bottom were talking about embers, and so the sort of hail of embers. And we've seen lots and lots of footage of that sort of thing come out of Black Saturday, out of the fires last summer. And again, even if you looked at some of the stuff that's going on in WA now, you always see that sort of ember attack. So that, like a hailstorm, or like little looses all around it. So if you've been through a fire, experienced that, you know, this is the thing that happens. All of a sudden you've got fire in front of you, you've got it behind you, to the left and to the right. And so that's the impact of embers. Okay. I'm going to get Callum to show us another little bit of video. And this is just some people reflecting on their experience of being in a fire or in a bushfire. So as soon as I can get my thing to do, I'll stop sharing and we'll get Callum to crank up again.
Ten years ago, when all the dams were full and the tanks were full and there was plenty of water, I probably would have stayed and I would have died.
Nothing went the way we might have anticipated.
Whatever preparations you put into place, you only need something small to go wrong.
You know, in future, I don't think we'd want to put the kids through that sort of trauma, I guess. Yeah, wouldn't put the kids through that again.
If it was my choice, I wouldn't stay again. If we had another day like that, if I had the opportunity to get out, I would go before the fire even got here.
Okay, so some interesting reflections there. And when you talk to people who've experienced the bushfire, that's often what they say. They say, well, I wouldn't do that again. And that was, you know, there was a bloke up at Buchan last summer. I think he was the local policeman. He said, I'd never do that again. And so, you know, a couple of people, certainly one of the people in those little clips there was really experienced and you know, knew this stuff inside out. And for him to be standing there saying, never do that again, you know, it gives you some sense of how dangerous it can be. And so you just need to reflect a little bit about that when you're making a decision. So what does it mean for you? It'll be stressful and traumatic situation that you have to plan and be prepared for. Exit roads might be blocked. We talked about that. Ember attack causes fires to spread quickly. Radiant heat's the biggest killer, and your ability to make good decisions will be impacted by many factors. One of the people there reflected about the impact of that event on children, and we know from lots of experience and from lots of now research that children, you know, the impact of these events on young people, children and adolescents is pretty dramatic. And we just, you know, there's been some deep research done into this, but you know, just reflecting on what happened locally last time we had a major fire in this area, that was the group that was most affected in the hills around Ferny Creek and Sassafras were the teenagers, because it wasn't on their radar. They weren't thinking about this stuff, and when it happened, you know, it really had quite profound impacts on a number of young people. So, you know, if you're a parent, you want to be thinking about, well, do I want to put my kids through that? And so that often it will be the trigger for you not to be here on those high-risk days. Okay, let's just move on now to how do you know if there is a fire. So enough talking from me. Why don't you open up your chat and have a talk about how would you know if there's a fire in your area? So how do you know there's a fire in the area? Anyone? So Callum, you might have to help me out here because I've lost the chat box. I can't see it.
John, we've got one suggestion for the Vic Safe app, so the emergency Vic app, and a couple from the floor talking about sirens.
Okay, so there's some sirens. So we'll talk about sirens and tick. Anything else? Or is that it?
And one suggestion for radio.
Okay.
And
so,
TV. There we go.
So how do we know if there's a fire? There's these days. There are lots of ways of knowing. So someone mentioned the Vic Emergency app, and that's great. If you haven't got that, you need to sort of get onto it because it will. Here we go. I've got it back again. So the app will, and you can on the app define a little area around your house, you know, up to a few kilometres, that will tell you where there's an event happening. So that's one way of getting notified about what's going on. A couple of people mentioned sirens. So the sirens we've got, there are lots of sirens around here. Brigades still use their sirens when we turn out. So if you hear a siren that goes for 90 seconds, that's simply telling you that the brigade is on its way out the door to something. All right. So we don't use it for everything anymore, but certainly during summer, if you hear a siren go off during summer, you need to find out from some other source of information, like the app or like the website, what that means. Denise has talked about radio and TV. So once an event's up and running, there are emergency broadcaster stations, both radio and TV. So Sky TV will run a little ticker across the bottom of the screen saying there are bushfires in the Dandenongs and blah, blah, blah. Go here to get more information. ABC Radio will switch into emergency broadcast mode, which means they just sit there and run a commentary on what's going on and provide advice. We talked about earlier, and Denise, thanks for picking that up, the problems with power. So you need to have a battery operated radio. Don't forget the radio in your car. So if you lose power, there's a radio in your car. You can go and listen to that one. You can, if you've got enough battery zooms in your phone, you can listen to radio via the phone. So this is all great, but I always say to people up here, stick your head out window, have a look, have a smell, and have a listen, because you'll hear trucks moving around. You might be able to smell smoke. You might, if you're in certain places, be able to see smoke or see heaven forbid flames. And so stick your head out the door and have a look. So don't get sucked into always relying on the telephone or the app or the TV or the radio, because as I said earlier, it doesn't take long for a fire to go from the bottom of the hill to the top of the hill here. 10 minutes is not a lot of time. You know, you won't be getting a warning if that's the case. It's important if to actively gather information. So to stay alert, so to keep your app open on those days, to look at the website, to listen to the radio, to sort of gather intelligence about what's going on around me. So there might be fires in Mount Evelyn. That's important for us because it means there's fires in our area. There'll be fires in sort of Kilsyth maybe, or Menzies Creek or wherever. You need to be sort of gathering that information pretty actively to influence what you do next. Okay, so that's pretty good. Sirens, we talked about the brigade sirens going off. There are community alerting sirens here in Ferny Creek and Sassafras, and that means that the the sirens we use at the brigade, and there are 3 other additional ones that are part of a pilot program that was established many years ago. So there are in fact 6 warning sirens. And so if those sirens go off for 5 minutes, that means you need to go and seek some more information. It doesn't mean evacuate. It means you need to go and find out what's going on, because something's going on that's going to have an impact on our community pretty soon. And so that's the community, that's the meaning of a community alerting siren. If that happens, I'll guarantee there'll be sirens going off everywhere. There'll be sirens going off all around the bottom of the hill and top of the hill and everywhere. So you hear a lot of sirens going off for a long time. That's a signal you need to gather more information. So, okay. Let's talk quickly now about the fire danger rating. And we might do a poll here, Callum. What does the fire danger rating actually mean? So give us your votes. Okay, so there's the result. So what does it mean? It doesn't mean it's an indicator of how likely a fire will start, or does it mean it's an indicator of how bad a fire would be if one started. So we've got a 50-50 split here, which is interesting. The fire danger ratings refer to how difficult it would be to put out a fire if one started, right? So it's not an indicator. So in that sense, it's the second answer. It's not an indicator of how likely one is to start, because we can't sort of tell that, because the source of ignition is not telling us about the source, but it's telling us how difficult it will be to put it out if one starts. And so we've got this watermelon illustration, or watermelon chart, if you like, which goes from low, moderate to code red. And so what do those things mean? Well, low, moderate means if a fire starts, it's pretty easy to put it out. Even high means we've got a pretty good chance of containing it pretty quickly. So we're less concerned about fire danger when we're in those bottom 2 sectors. Once it hits very high, it's getting trickier. So it's a little bit harder to put out. Once you're up into the top end of the very high scale, there's not much difference between that and severe. So once it hits severe, that's usually the trigger for a total fire ban. So that means that fires will run freely and will be difficult to contain. And when you tip into extreme and code red, that means we haven't got much chance of mechanically intervening to stop a fire. So and once you're in that end, so once you're at the code red end of the scale, the chance that no buildings are basically constructed here to withstand those sorts of conditions. So code red, certainly up here, code red will be, we're not going to be around in Ferny Creek and Sassafras or in Tremont and Sherbrooke today, because it's just too dangerous. And once it's in the severe and extreme, you need to make a judgment call. So extreme, I'd be advising people to leave also, particularly with kids. And so some of the things that are going to influence you are, whether or not you have children, or, your age and your ability to stick around. The severe is a bit trickier, because we'll sometimes get severe fire danger ratings around this part of the world when it's really not that bad, and you learn that over time about how to make those judgments. But often that's the trigger. So declaration of total fire ban will often be the trigger for people who are leaving for the day. And that's a good sort of trigger to have. We don't actually have that many. So total fire bans on average in the Central District, usually around 10 a year. That's an average. So some years are obviously worse than others. So the Black Saturday year, I think there were 17. Often there's only 3 or 4. Okay, this year we haven't had any yet. So you can see it's not something that's a decision that you need to make all the time, but it's often good information about helping you to make a decision about whether or not to stay or chuff off for the day somewhere safer. So on severe days, we can expect, you know, hot, dry, possibly windy conditions, and if a fire starts, it will probably be uncontrollable, or it may well be uncontrollable. You know, in extreme conditions, we expect extremely hot, dry, windy conditions. A fire starts, takes hold, it will be uncontrollable. So we won't be able to stop it using mechanical intervention. It generally depends on the weather for us to pull up those sorts of fires in those conditions. Some sort of change in the weather. So the wind drops, it rains, some sort of natural intervention. In those conditions, spot fires will start more readily because the landscape is dry. These things are done on a formula that looks at things like the weather, the fuel load, the fuel dryness. So there's a sort of there's a calculation that's done based on weather conditions, essentially. Code Red's a manual construction where the Emergency Management Commissioner makes a decision based on a whole lot of different factors about whether or not to call a Code Red. So we'll just do a quick poll about how many. Does anyone know how many Code Red days we've had in the Central Region in the past 5 years? So Callum, can I get you to start that poll? Not that one, but we can use that one if you like. Oh, there we go. How many Code Red days have we had in the past 5 years in the Central Region? So that bit that I showed you on the map before, stretching from, you know, Ballarat across to Reefton, down to Lorne and across to sort of Wonthaggi. Okay, so we've got a few people taking a few votes here. So 3 Code Red days, 1 Code Red day, no Code Red days. Have a punt. I can't tell who's voting for what. It's okay. We'll give you another few seconds here. We'll give you another 10, 15, give you another 20 seconds, all right? Okay, that'll do. So, Code Red days, 5 of you have plumped for none, and 6 of you have plumped for between 1 and 3. In fact, we haven't had any. Oh, we'll go to the next question. We've had no Code Red days in the Central District since they were introduced more than a decade ago. So there would have been one day post Black Saturday that had the conditions which might have led to a Code Red day, but they weren't in place then. So basically, we've never had one in the Central District. I think there's only been one that I know of, and that was last year, and it was a part of the sort of northwestern part of the state where they called it Code Red day. But beyond that, we've never actually had any. So you know, total fire ban days, 10 a year perhaps. Code Red days, even fewer. So a few people had a crack at how many severe extreme days there have been, and again, it's not many, right? So as I said, it's usually around the sort of the 3 or 4 per year, but it's not a very high number. So you know, those conditions in which we need to think about leaving are not that many. So you know, often it's the severe that's the trigger, and you need to make your own decision about that. We'll give you all the information you like, but at the end of the day, it's your choice. No one's going to tell you to leave. All right. Okay. So extreme Code Red, we've discussed that. So we were talking about how you find out what's going on, and basically there's a lot of information swirling around these days about everything. So you know, when something's going on, you'll find there are people providing information all over the place. So you get stuff, well, for a while we'll get Google, and who knows how long. There's stuff on Facebook, and there's stuff, you know, family members will ring you up and say, you know, do you know this is going on? there's local gossip, local radio, friends, work, YouTube. There's a whole range of sources of info there. And I guess that a lot of it is basically white noise. So, I notice often a lot of the local Facebook pages will light up whenever there's, where any time the fire siren goes up, and there's a lot of stuff there that's just basically not accurate. So how do you know what of this information is going to help you make decisions? And basically, if you overheard in a cafe that or saw on Facebook that there was a great business opportunity, do you race off and invest in it? Probably not. And so it's a bit like that with bushfire. So how much more important is it that we need to be certain about the sources of information we're going to rely on during an emergency? So here are some. So local news. So as I talked earlier about emergency broadcasters, so there's some broadcasting that goes on that's a direct feed from the fire services and emergency services. So that's one source. Vic Emergency app. So we talked about that. Easy to download, easy to use. You set up your own watch zones, and you'll hear about incidents as they're reported. So it's another source. And there's also information on the app about when it's a total fire ban day, weather information. You can put in there's a whole range of different emergencies you can subscribe to there. If you want to know about shark attacks, you can learn about that too. But really for fires, it's pretty useful. Vic Emergency Hotline. So there's a 1-800 number. Again, same information, different method of delivering it. There's an emergency management or Vic Emergency website. So that's a pretty good source of information also. National Relay Service, if you need to do that. Interpreter, if you need to help with understanding the information that's being put around. Agency social media. So if you're a Facebook person and you want to know what's going on, subscribe to the Facebook or the Twitter of CFA or or Forest Fire Management Victoria or VICSES or somewhere like that, and rely on the information that's spread by that agency rather than Fred blogs around the corner. And finally, there's a national emergency alerting system, which is a telephone-based system called Emergency Alert. And so if they want to issue a warning, and we'll talk about specifically what warnings are. Once it hits a certain level, they'll start simply your phone will ring in some circumstances. There'll be a recorded message on there saying, there's a bushfire about to threaten your area. You need to take action now. Or you'll get a text message via your mobile phone. And the mobile phone app is location specific, so it will ping all the phones that are operating in that particular area. So rather than simply relying on location-based subscription, wherever you are. So if you're in Mallacoota and there's a fire in Mallacoota, the phone, your mobile phone will ping to tell you that's going on. Let's talk a little bit about the levels of advice you get. So in a nice tiered sense, you get the first sort of message you would get as an advice message saying there's something going on in the general vicinity, you need to be aware of it. You need to go and monitor it and find out what's going on. And it might also be advice that there was something that had happened and now it's gone. Watch and act a bit more serious. That's actually asking you to do something. So an emergency is developing nearby. You need to take action to protect yourself and others. As I said, but we talked about sirens earlier. Once it hits watch and act, the incident controller might decide that this is serious enough that he'll trigger the emergency community alert sirens, and so all the sirens will go off. And the higher level is the emergency warning, which says you're in imminent danger and you need to take action immediately and you will be impacted. So, it'd be nice to think we'd get these in a nice succession, but often, particularly in places like this where the impact is quite quick, you might go straight to emergency warning. So you mightn't get the nice advice and the watch and act messages at all. You just have an emergency warning, or you might get nothing. All right, so don't wait for a warning to come, because you might not get one, particularly in this neck of the woods. There's a couple of others. So evacuation, and evacuation was used last year. So there were evacuation warning given for, and this is a recommendation. So you can't be compelled to leave, but if someone's sending me an evacuation message, I think I'll be heeding it, frankly. And so last year, we think back to last year in Gippsland, evacuation warnings were used quite a lot, and up in the northeast, and something like 11,000 people left East Gippsland before the fires impacted. And so it's used to in a sensible way to move people out of an area before the impact hits it. So it was pretty successful in those circumstances. And the final thing is community information. So you might get a notification that's basically just for information. So, it might be, and that might take a couple of different forms. So it might be coming as a newsletter, or it might come to tell you that there's been an incident and it's over. So, as I said before, don't wait to get one of these. Don't wait to get a warning. So if we look about how quickly these things take, or how long it takes for these things to happen, they have fire starts. Fires reported at 000 after 3 or 4 minutes. In 15 minutes, the advice message is released. So it's already taken 15 to 17 minutes for an advice message to be released. By the time that's happened in this neck of the woods, the fire's already here. Okay. 30 minutes, you might get an emergency warning. So you can see that for us, relying on those sort of official formal warnings might not always be great, but you need to be aware that this stuff applies across Victoria. So when you're traveling, these things can be quite useful, but locally, this is much more useful. Use your senses, have a look, have a listen, and have a smell. Okay, so remember, fire danger rating tells you how difficult it's going to be to control a fire if one starts. Use credible sources of information. So get your information from a credible source. Vic Emergency app, emergency broadcaster, an agency Facebook page or Twitter account, not from Fred down the road, and don't wait for warning. Okay, so now we're going to have a look at planning and decision making. So let's just think about this, and I'm going to ask you to give us some input here. So we think about the risks in our local area here. I'm just going to run through one hypothetical situation. So it's 8 o'clock on a Wednesday morning. You look outside and you can see it's hot and windy. The morning news is reporting that it's a day of extreme fire danger. So it's hot and windy, extreme fire danger, low humidity, crunchy underfoot, all that stuff. You get in your car and go off to work or in town, as many people will, and you can see, as you're going, you can see these little branches falling down on the road. You feel heat as you're driving out, coming through the glass windows. So around lunchtime, you hear that there's a fire that's broken out in the basin. So you go into the Vic Emergency app to find out where it is, and you can see that it's actually quite close to your place. So you get in your car and you start heading home to make sure everything's okay. You get a bit closer and see that the road's blocked by the police. You wind down your window and they advise you it's not safe to go into the areas of fires burning and the trees have started to come down on the road. So you will have to find somewhere else to go until the fire is reopened. So I'm going to ask you a few questions now. And Callum's going to stick up a poll with a few questions in it. I hope. So there's your scenario: hot, windy.
Just want to make sure I get that right poll for you, John. That's average Wednesday in summer. That's the one you want there?
Yeah, that's the one. Yep. Average Wednesday in summer. You're off to work.
Should be coming up now.
Okay, so let's have a think about this so people can vote on this. So where would you be on an average Wednesday in summer? Work, home, holiday, shopping? There we go. So one's going to be at work, one's at home, working. Of course, these days, on an average Wednesday in summer, we're likely to be working from home. So factor that one in. Okay, we got 8 people. Give it a few more secs. Okay. And the second question is about what would you have been prepared? So these are the questions. So this is a really simple scenario, this one. So I think we've got everyone's results there. So where would you have been? So pretty high ratio of people at home, which is interesting. And, you know, we sort of know that roughly half of people will be at home and half of people will be at work. That's just from past experience. So depending on what day it is, of course. So if it's a Wednesday, people at work. And that's why fires on the weekend are actually a bit problematic for us. That's why, you know, you think about Black Saturday, there were a lot of people at home in places like King Lake. So that creates a different sort of scenario in terms of responding to the fire. So thinking about last summer, would you have been prepared if you needed to spend a few nights away from home in emergency situations? So some people have thought about this. That's good. So they might. So that's about doing things like packing some clothes and a go bag, basically stuff that's got your medication in it. You know, a phone charger, that sort of thing. So some people are unsure. So you need to have a think about that. About, you know, would you be prepared to spend a few days away from home in an emergency? So roughly half and half there. Some people yes, some people no or not sure. And last summer, did you have an emergency kit packed with all those things? So photos, medicines, yes or no. So that's something to think about. I mean, in general terms, while it's great to have a go bag, up here, given the risk, I sort of advise people that it's also good to think about the worst case scenario. So worst case scenario meaning you lose your house. So it's pretty simple to actually pack the things that you value really the most into about 3 cardboard boxes and take them off the hill for the summer. And so that's a good practice to get into. You know, and it'll be things like photos, passports, might be kids' memorabilia, could be a painting, could be some jewelry, that sort of stuff. You need to think about, well, what am I going to do with that to make sure that because they're the things that when people's houses have been lost, they're the things that they reflect upon as the things that they miss the most. So, yeah, you can always build a new house, buy new furniture, but it's some of that personal stuff that defines you as a person that people are really sad to lose. And the second thing I would also chip in there is make sure you've got enough insurance. So insurance to rebuild. So if that's it, so there's a couple of just quick tips over and above what we're talking about. Okay. So I think we've done that one. So what I'm suggesting to you is you need to have a bit of a plan. So we won't do the second, we'll only do that one scenario, but you need to think ahead and make a plan before summer starts. And that's about, you know, taking some of that stuff off the hill. Having a plan that's more than an intention. So what are you going to do? What's the rest of your family going to do? You know, and if you want to, you know, to help to prepare your property, you need to be thinking about what can I do to help ensure that when I come back again on those days when I live, that my house is still here, even though I wasn't here to defend it. And often that's just about good housekeeping. And so if you want help to prepare your property, CFA runs some bushfire planning workshops, and we can go into a lot more detail. There's also a lot of literature around about that we provide that helps you make those decisions. Download the Vic Emergency app. Make sure you're staying informed properly. Okay, so obviously this year we're operating in a slightly different environment, and you know the good thing is it probably won't come up, but the question's been asked. What do you do about COVID-19? So what difference does COVID-19 make? Can I still leave early? And the simple answer to that is yes. And I guess we've seen that in action over in WA over the past few days. And you know, the instruction is, even if there's a sort of hard lockdown, such as we were in earlier in the year, yes, you can leave. You know, you do all the things the best things you can do in COVID, which is masking up, maintaining safe social distance, but you don't have to hang around even in a hard lockdown if you're threatened by bushfire. So, and it was interesting because it did actually come up in WA, and people were a little bit confused, and they possibly hadn't thought about it. Emergency services, but yep, because you're going to have to put people in places where they're gathered together, and so there's a whole lot of planning that's gone around to how do you run a relief centre that's COVID safe. So it's been thought of. So can I leave? Yes, you can. But once you're out of the area, you need to be making sure you're taking the normal COVID-19 precautions. Okay, quickly we're going to talk about survival options if your plan fails, and we've touched on a bit of that already in one of those DVDs. So you need to have this stuff at your disposal. So cover up, and we saw that in one of the animations. So skin covered with natural fibre clothing can offer some radiant heat protection. So hat, eye protection, mask, natural fibre clothing. So cotton, wool, that sort of stuff. So jeans are okay. Cotton shirts. Tough leather gloves, sturdy boots, and wool or cotton socks. So we're avoiding sort of polyesters and things like that because they're not going to help you. And if you do get caught, you need to be in a position where you can find shelter behind a solid object. As I said before, that's what kills people during bushfires. So being in a house or behind a solid structure is one of the ways to go. There are some other sort of last minute options here. So, you know, these are what we call places of last resort or survival options of last resort. So you can see that there's mention of there's some things that we don't have up here. So rivers, we haven't got one of those handy, but thinking more globally in terms of you're traveling around Victoria, dam, neighbourhood safer place. We don't have any neighbourhood safer places in Ferny Creek and Sassafras, and these are places that have been specified as places where if you go there, you should survive the influx of radiant heat. So they're designed to actually protect you from radiant heat. Sometimes it's just a footy ground. So you go to some towns and it's the local footy ground. We do have a fire refuge in Ferny Creek. My advice to you is if you cannot walk to the fire refuge in a matter of a few minutes from your house, then that's not a survival option for you. You need to sort of discount that from any planning about going there by car, because the road, I'll guarantee the road will be congested. You might not even get there. Plus, if it's a school day, it's going to be full of kids, and so it has a limited capacity. So if your kids are going to local Ferny Creek Primary School, that's great because they've got a survival option and you really don't need to worry about them because they'll be managed, and actually you put yourself in danger trying to go there and retrieve them and take them back to somewhere that's probably less safe. Ploughed paddock and reserve, stationary cars, again, will only work in grassland, basically. Don't even think about trying to just pull off the side of the road in the middle of a forest and think you're going to survive. So swimming pool. So these are the last ditch survival options that people have used. So there's some examples of some neighbourhood safer places. As I said, main street of a town, footy ground, foreshore, camping area. So, they're pretty rudimentary, but the distance, the calculations have been made about how far is this from a body of fuel that will stop me from surviving. Okay, so it's just a few images here about, why it's not great to be travelling through fire-affected landscape. Because it's basically pretty dangerous. So, and there was a little bit of video that came up out of Western Australia just yesterday of a fire truck driving through circumstances a bit like that photo on the top right-hand corner. You're on a hiding to nowhere because you can't see where you're going, you can't see other vehicles. The branch comes down in front of you and you've had it. Okay, so staying off the roads is pretty important. Okay. There's lots of resources around on the CFA website, so www.cfa.vic.gov.au. There's a thing called Your Guide to Survival, Your Guide to Property Preparation, so it's all downloadable. We've got copies of it at the station. You can drop in on a Sunday morning or a Wednesday evening and we'll give you some of this stuff. Planning workshops are there, and you know it says there write a plan and prepare your property. Well, a written plan is often pretty straightforward. It might only be you know, a bunch of dot points about things that you have to do before, during, and after. Download Vic Emergency app. Connect with your local fire brigade. We're always there. Connect with your local district. So CFA Northeast District. There's some contact details there, and as I said, this will be recorded and we'll probably load it up onto our Facebook page apart from anything else. But there's the telephone number, there's an email address. If it's an emergency, dial 000. Okay, so if this has been troublesome from your day, talk to someone about how you're feeling. Beyond Blue, Lifeline, normal things. If this has triggered any emotional responses,